Oh, hello, everyone, to all who is watching across all platforms. You got a special day. We normally don't do these on Tuesdays, but here we are with a very special guest. And today we're talking about branching corporate learning programs to improve effectiveness. How many of y'all, keep it honest, how many of y'all have heard about branching corporate learning programs? We got something special. We have an expert. Linda, I'm going to let you introduce yourself because you can do it better than I can. So go ahead and tell the people who you are and why this conversation is so important to you.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to present and talk a little bit about branching. It is one of my favorite things, that one of my early claims to fame that I literally started developing when I was, an undergraduate back in the late 80s.
Nice.
So I am a behavioral scientist by academic training and by practice. I develop learning experiences and specifically learning technologies that allow you to learn in innovative and new ways. So that's been my bread and butter. Branching in itself is a very diverse term that can refer to things like diagnostic testing. So people who've taken high stakes assessments like the ASVAB, if you're going into the military, it determines what military occupational branch you'll go into, as well as what school within that. So that's a type of branching. But the branching that I often talk about with people, in addition to technologies that branch, is the design of branching programs. So it's not just like, now that we have all these authoring tools, people are like, oh, branching, I'll just go in and design stuff. And they start right there with the tool. And then what are decision points? That's kind of like building a house without having your architecture in place. So I always say, how about we create the blueprint first? And the blueprint is the design. So that's a lot of what my work is. A lot of my work involves consulting with people, determining where they are. If it's a matter of me teaching them about the theoretical piece, whether it's me teaching them about the design piece, or whether it's the actual how you build the things, or if you're wanting to build your own learning technology branching tech, right? A lot of people like to use generative AI to do that, but that's not necessarily the best approach, nor is it the same thing. So that's a little bit about my background.
Yeah, we're going to have some fun
Yeah.
because, as you can see, audience, I don't know if y'all can feel it, but I feel the energy. As Linda talked about that, I feel her passion for this subject and this topic. And as you know, she said since the 80s. So we know she has some stories and some experiences that we're going to have you share with us, Linda. So let's get into this. You mentioned that there's a couple ways that you can kind of use branching to develop technology, to develop learning pathways. Let's focus on the learning pathways for now. You know, a lot of organizations, like you mentioned, there's a million LMSs and different learning platforms that folks are using in their organizations. But how do you design something using branching? Like, what does that process look like? I love that you mentioned developing a blueprint first. So tell us, like, what does that blueprint look like?
It starts with, what is it you're trying to teach in the first place, right? So are you trying, what is the task or the nature of the content that you're trying to convey to your audience? That's really the first step, because in my mind, and certainly people have different opinions, and bless them, everyone's entitled to their opinion. I distinguish between two different types of tasks when it comes to corporate training. There's procedural tasks that are very much step by step. You do this, then you do this, then you do this, then you do this. Not really a lot of variation there. And if there is variation, it's usually on a decision point. Do you want strawberry, vanilla, or chocolate, if you're talking about ice cream, right? And so you would
Mm,
go down different paths
you're
depending on
making me
which way.
hungry now.
Oh, I'm sorry about that. It's still early here, so anyway. So that's a procedural task, and procedural tasks are typically linear in nature. And for those kinds of tasks, really the best way to teach them is by doing them, because the whole point is that you're trying to go to a standardized outcome, right? And I often talk about Starbucks lattes because I did that work way back in the day. How do you build a Starbucks latte? And certainly there's lots of different ways to build a Starbucks latte, but the whole point is that any Starbucks you go into, you should have the same experience regardless of which location it is. So those are procedural tasks. And in my mind, procedural tasks aren't the best for branching. Where branching really shines is when you do tasks that are not like that. So the non-procedural tasks, some people call them far transfer training, which just refers to the fact that the way you train them in the room is not necessarily the way they're applied out in the real world. You have to actually take an application step, right? So it basically means there's not just one right answer. It depends on the circumstances. And so branching allows you to simulate what those different circumstances are. So depending on what choice you make, it's going to impact every other choice that you make. And so for FAR transfer training, which quite honestly is a lot of training in corporate world,
Yeah.
decision making, troubleshooting, problem solving, those are all FAR transfer tasks. And if you know how to design scenarios well, and you understand what those different decision points are, you're going to develop a much, much more effective training program that feels very tailored to the individual, because it's the individual who's making the choices at any given time.
I love that. I mean, this is going to be something that is very beneficial. As you mentioned, AI. A lot of folks are leveraging AI to develop their programming faster and with
Right.
less cognitive usage from a human.
Right.
Unfortunately, and I get why. Right, you can develop it faster, but I feel like it kind of challenges the ability to branch a little bit. Um, when you're talking about leveraging AI. Can you tell us how you kind of can use both, if at all possible, to use both to ensure that branching is effective on those non-procedural patterns and trainings, but also where you don't have to take so much cognitive usage from a human to kind of think through those different pathways?
Yeah, there's so many things, and people will say, "Oh, you're just so anti-AI." They see some of my posts about generative AI and they come to that conclusion. I am absolutely not anti-AI. I've been building this stuff since the early days. I mean, literally the very first program I built was a machine learning program. So I'm very much a fan of definitely use machine learning when it comes into play. And for things like summarizing, generalizing, it's great. The problem with using generative AI for branching programs like this, and believe me, last year I had tons of people coming to me trying to have me build different types of chatbots for them using generative AI. The problem with it is that it's a predictive text based machine learning. So it's not necessarily suited to task. So it's going to do its best guesses in terms of what the answer should be, but the experience is going to be different every single time that you take it. And what that means is that the feedback is going to be inconsistent. And when you're
Mm.
doing, especially for transfer training, consistent feedback is what makes the experience effective. And so one of the clients I was working with early last year was about to demo his brilliant role play scenario technology that was powered by ChatGPT. And I ran through a couple of scenarios with him where, again, he thought he had models that were teaching people how to practice those specific models of how to have difficult conversations, critical conversations. But the problem was the criteria changed every single time. And so you come out of those sessions going, okay, so what am I supposed to do differently? Let me try again. And when you try again, you get completely different feedback. So you can't really tell if you're getting better, if you're getting worse. And that's the problem with using generative AI, is that it sounds super convincing, but after you do multiple trials on the same kind of thing, you get to see how inconsistent it is. And so that's not helpful. In contrast, when you're developing a learning domain and you want to use machine learning to create FAR transfer training using branching, you have to develop what's called a critical rational set. And that is basically looking at the totality of all the decisions that could be made in your scenario and being able to tell, what's the minimum number of responses you need to have in order for this thing to be able to say, that's correct, that's incorrect, that's close, but it's this far, it's just this far off. So, again, it's very intentional in terms of how you design a critical rational set, in terms of what are the close in non-examples that are, yeah, this is part of the idea of what we're teaching. It's just in there. It's like an edge case versus this is a far out non-example. So it sounds plausible, but guess what? That ain't it. So that's what I mean when I'm talking about developing a critical rational set. And there's much, much more to that, but I don't want to take up the entire conversation, because that might be a little too esoteric.
I'm about to say, I feel like that could be a whole other
It
episode
really
right
could
there.
be. Yeah.
But no, that's cool. So without having to go too technical for everyone, critical rational set. How do you know when you have that minimal viable critical rational set of responses?
Yeah, there's basically three things that you develop. The first is basically what are your guidelines of what makes this thing, what's the basic principle or what's the basic concept. That's the first thing that you establish. Make it really, really clear in your mind as a designer what that is. And then from there, you develop what are called the critical attributes, which means that these are the things that absolutely must be present in order for it to be a part of that set. And then what are the variable attributes? And the variable attributes are how you figure out all the different ways that that concept, that scenario could vary, and what makes it in concept versus out of concept. And so it's both critical attributes and variable attributes that are defined. And then from there, you can actually use machine learning to help develop what those are. And that's where it gets super, super exciting. But I always say, double check it. But that's basically how you build the system. So it really doesn't, I did a workshop back in June, and I used a case study that I developed for a client, which was based on 70 different clinical psychology techniques. So this was a therapy example, right? Because people want me to build therapy bots. I'm like, if I build a therapy bot, this is how I build it. Actually showed them 4 different types of branching scenarios that are presented within a curriculum as what's called in behavioral psychology, a fading technique. So you start off with a lot of strong instruction, which is basically more show me kinds of branching technologies, which is giving them that piece of this is what, and again, if you're doing it using algorithms like I do in the curriculums that I've developed, it senses how quickly it's like, oh yeah, Jevon's got this. We don't need to belabor this point with him anymore. Let's throw him into something that's a bit more challenging. And so it would go from those highly, show me instructive pieces to things that are more prompted. And then those prompts start to fade out until you're actually just practicing on your own. So you go from observing as an external observer, watching the client or the therapist and the client working together, that fades out. So then you become a part of the scenario. And then you're the one who's acting as the therapist. But it's basically a 4-stage model. So the two pieces are not necessarily mutually exclusive. That's not to say that you have to use machine learning when you're developing branching, because authoring tools that are out there that people use commonly. So Storyline from Articulate has branching in it. Captivate from Adobe has branching in it. That actually came from my work, the one that's in Adobe. That came out like over 20 years ago now. And then nowadays, we even have tools that you can create branching VR experiences that require no coding. So I don't want to give the impression that this is all highly technical and that you have to be some kind of genius. The other one that I throw out too, that's very common in instructional design that some people in your audience might know, is the Thiagi 4-door approach. And Thiagi is, learning theorist who's pretty popular. He's known for his engaging learning experiences. But the 4-door approach, this is one that I used when I was at Sun Microsystems, when I was working with Java developers, helping them code. It's basically, choose your own adventure. Where do you want to start? Do you want to get some background information? Do you want to go to the documentation? Because that's a lot of times developers, I just want the answer, right? Do you want to go to the Java community and ask the community? Do you want to go to the dojo and practice some code and check it out for yourself? It's these kind of opportunities to work non-linearly through a curriculum. And that's just all the branching is in that kind of approach, in that kind of a Thiagi 4-door approach. So it's really just about jumping around where you want to, instead of being forced to go down a very specific learning path, which again, learning paths, procedural in nature in terms of start here, go here, go here. But is that really suited to the task?
Right.
But adults, especially adult learners, it's like, I don't want you telling me what to do. I want to be able to make my own. And so
right. No, I'm glad you mentioned that, because it's like with branching, it also sounds like, if you understand your audience or the role that they're learning for, you can really create something that's super robust that allows them to stay engaged while learning what they actually need to focus on, rather than just trying to do a catch-all. So how do you, if you go into an organization and say you're looking at, organizations typically say, hey, we want this, but it's actually not the thing that they need to have. Yeah. So how do you, as a learning expert, say, okay, yeah, I understand that this is something you want, but here's what you need, and here's how we're going to design it. How do you kind of change the thinking of the leadership to give them what they really, truly need? And the reason why I ask this, because I know a lot of learning professionals watching this is like, yeah, we would love to do all of this, Linda and Jevon, but our leadership feels like they know it all. So how do we sell them on this approach?
Yeah, that's never happened to me. No. Like literally that example that I was talking about with the therapist, the therapy training, they actually came to me saying they wanted to build a practice engine. Like, this is what I want you to build for us. And I'm like, oh, okay. Based on, what's our rationale? So what I typically do is I don't like to make people uncomfortable with their own thinking, right? Like, I don't want someone to think like, why did you think that was a good idea? So to me, I call it, calling someone's baby ugly. And I don't like to do that, right? Nobody likes to be told your baby's ugly. So I like to talk people through their thinking process. And so, what problem are you trying to solve? Who's your audience? What's the task? Why do you think this method is going to work? And get inside their head about why they propose that in the first place, instead of coming in as the almighty, all-knowing everything, right? I give ourselves the opportunity to co-create together, having a clear understanding what it is that they're trying to accomplish in the first place. And so from there, I can generally sway people in a direction that makes sense for them. And branching isn't one technology. It's really refers more broadly to a methodology, just that's nonlinear, right? It's interactive and it's nonlinear. But the way that you can do branching is there's a multitude of different ways. You can do it in simple tools like Canva and PowerPoint and Google Docs. I mean, it's literally just hyperlinking, right? Or you can do things like, that have very much weighted decisions based on, okay, if you make this choice, then the other choices that are left for you to make fall into this domain. So you can get very, very complicated with it. So that's why I like to talk people through it. And I like to bring leaderships to their own conclusions. And so oftentimes I like to also show people what's possible. Because a lot of times when I talk about things, they're like, oh, you can't do that. Like, I literally remember back in 2018, I was still working at Oracle, and we were working on some chatbot project. And the developer I was working with was like, you can't do that with a chatbot. And I'm like, oh yeah, you can. And he's like, you're making me look bad. And, I'm the one presenting to leadership, right? And so they're like, you're promising the world and we can't actually do that. So the approach that I typically take is I do build rapid prototypes. So I show people what I'm talking about. So it's not just, don't take my word for it. I actually get them in there, give them the example to play with so they can start to imagine what their own content would look like brought to life. Like, it just makes it a lot more real. So I'm not in the business of trying to tell people that they're wrong and I'm right. That's not at all what I'm about. I'm about us co-creating what's going to be best for what the problem my client is trying to solve.
Yeah, no, I absolutely love that. And you also demonstrated beautifully. My favorite topic was this empathetic leadership, because you listen to their approach. How did they arrive at that decision? You asked, you made it a coaching conversation, asking questions to clarify and put the onus on them to kind of think through what they're, pay attention to their thinking. So wonderful that you also covered my favorite topic while we're talking about branching learning. So I know a lot of folks are like, this sounds amazing, and I understand that you actually have some resources that we're going to make available based on after this conversation. So outside of what you have written and what you have prepared for, let me just say thank you for preparing a document for them for this conversation first, Linda. But secondly, are there some resources that like you tend to enjoy as you've learned over the years about branching and they can kind of take into their environments?
Yeah. So I talked about the difference between near transfer and far transfer training. That is not at all, a Linda Berberick concept. That actually is something from Ruth Clark. And Ruth Clark's pretty well known out there in the world of technical training. So one of the books that I often recommend to people when it comes to the design piece is Ruth Clark's book, Designing Technical Training. And it's been out there as, a tool to refer to in instructional design and training literature for at least a couple decades now. So I say, if you don't know the difference between far transfer and near transfer tasks, look up that book from Ruth Clark. You can find it online. It's like literally, I have done sessions on both of those topics, and I just link to her resource online and read about the difference, because she literally does walk you through how do you write the objectives, how do you write the learning experiences, how do you write the practices, and both in a live setting and in a virtual setting. What she didn't imagine is where we are now with the world of AI. And so that's why I like to take it to the next level of how do you integrate machine learning into it. But I would say definitely as a starting point, especially if you want to follow my advice and use these for far transfer tasks, I say read her book and learn what a far transfer task is. And far transfer is like the culmination of everything else that she teaches in that book. So I always say, if you don't know what I'm talking about, if you didn't know that there is a specific way to teach a procedure, there's a specific way to teach a concept, then I say that book will be immensely helpful to you just out of the gate. The other that I mentioned was Thiagi's 4-Door. You can literally Google that and you'll find lots of people in the learning space writing about it. I say, please go to Thiagi himself, because he's not dead and he's written about it. Like, that's what I always say when I hear people summarizing other people's work when they're alive and well and they've written lots on it themselves. It's all like, please go to the source, because
Absolutely.
especially now, because a lot of people are just using generative AI. They haven't even read the sources themselves. They don't really have a new idea. They just want to sound impressive. And a lot of, and I'm not shy about calling those people out either. I'm like,
Well, that's another thing about using AI. It's like, everyone is think they're an instant expert, but if you ask to drill down more into the topic of conversation, it's going to be hard because you didn't really know it. You just got it from AI.
yeah,
So yeah, so I definitely recommend folks, if you're listening to this and you're like, hey, I do want to actually know what I'm doing here. I love what you just said, and like, go to the sources, understand the frameworks, that the foundation of what we're talking about here today. Definitely look at Linda's work because she has some amazing things. We're going to link to the documentation she's written and crafted just for you all. So feel special, and definitely reach out and connect with her if you want to learn more on the topic. So as we wind down here, Linda, what are some things that you want the audience to be thinking about as they go forth and conquer this branch learning experience? What are some things that they need to be thinking about moving forward?
well, you actually brought up something that I haven't talked about before, but it's actually an excellent use of branching.
Awesome. I like to hear that. Let's
Yeah,
go.
yeah. So one of the things that's always sort of sat in my craw when I evaluate, one of my offers is I'll go in and I'll evaluate an existing learning experience. If it didn't quite hit the mark, a leader will contact me and say, yeah, why didn't this land? So I'll go in and take a look. And one of the things I notice all the time are these sort of like all purpose courses that sort of apply to everyone. So there's some initiative that you're doing at your company and everybody needs to know about it. So blah, here's the training. But one of the things you said was talking about the roles of the people. And I love doing branching based on how does this affect me in the role that I have in the company, as opposed to just sort of this catch-all kind of thing. And so I really do encourage people to look at branching based on, okay, is there an overall piece that applies to everybody? And is then there specific places where we can branch off, where someone who's in customer support needs to know this, someone who's in product needs to know this, someone who is in technical support needs to know this, someone who is in sales needs to know this. And so it's not one experience, it's unique experiences based on your role.
Yes, I'm so glad you said that. I harp on that all the time, and people were like, I don't have time to do that, or we don't have the capability. So here you have it, everyone. Linda herself is saying to do it based on role. So thank you for doing that, because everyone, if you really want buy-in from folks, it has to be relevant to their
Exactly.
experiences. If you're just making them do it, it's like, okay, that was a waste of however many hours, because they're not going to take in anything that was in that training. I saw it a lot in the military. Like, we had so much annual, computer-based trainings and stuff like that, and people would just play it and click it, keep the browser open, and like not
Yeah.
learn anything after a while. So I'm so glad you said that. Well, this has been a fantastic conversation, and I feel like we could literally go on for hours more, because we didn't even scratch the surface of branch corporate learning. But I want to make sure I'm respectful of your time and the listeners and watchers' time as well. So how can everyone connect with you if they should want to either bring you in to their organization or just learn some of your wisdom?
So I am all about helping people. Like, that is completely what I do. So people like, oh, you develop learning experiences. No, I help you develop learning experiences. Can I develop them? Obviously, I've done tons, right? But my whole thing is being generative as a human being. And that means passing on the wisdom to other people so that they can pass it on to other people, and so on and so on. To me, that's what generativity means. So if you're interested in learning more about my work and what I do, my website is lindablearning.com. That's a great place to see some examples, case studies, recommendations, book time, blah, 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 blah. If you want to see some of my past work that I've done, I've got a YouTube channel, also Linda B Learning on YouTube. You can see the session I just did back in June on FAR transfer trainings in there, branching's in there. And of course, on LinkedIn, please do connect with me on LinkedIn, because I'm happy to connect with you and always happy to, like I said, help out, even if that's not work. Like, I always get concern when people think, oh, you're just trying to, find clients. Like, no, networking is much broader than that. It's like, how can I be
Absolutely.
of help? And that's the key thing.
Yeah, yeah. I wish more folks understood that, because somehow we've gone away and we're so skeptical of people just actually looking to be human and talk
Mhm.
and learn, So I'm glad you said that. I appreciate your time, Linda. Looking forward to learning more and engaging more with you, and just taking time out to do this, to just connect and talk and riff on learning. So thank you so much again for that. Thank you to everyone who has watched this episode. Make sure you still post comments. As I say all the time, we see them. We will respond to you on all platforms, whether you're watching on LinkedIn, Facebook, or YouTube. And remember, until next time, just make sure you turn on notifications, because you never know when I'm going to pop on with an amazing person like Linda. Just turn on the notifications. And until next time, remember,